All right, I've now turned the audio on in the room so everybody knows that we are being recorded. I did see Todd Peterson and Willa Williford as committee members that joined via Zoom. So hoping our comms folks can make them co-host so that we can see their video and that sort of thing. And I'm now seeing Sarah Leonard, who's joining as Steamboat Springs Chamber. So same would apply for Sarah. If they choose to share their video, obviously there's Todd. We were just discussing that were our numbers dwindling or did the weather scare people away? So glad to see we got the Zoom options working for folks. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. As usual, we will do just a quick kind of roll call, mostly to help out our minute taker. And then we'll get to kind of the business items on today's agenda. I'm Brad Calvert, city staff.
Phil Stillman. Steve Frazier.
Emily Katzman.
Keith Gooding. Chris Sykes.
Colleen Crease.
Go to the online folks real quick.
Todd Peterson.
Sarah Leonard.
Did I hear you, Willa?
Hi, yes, I'm here.
Sorry, that was Willa Williford.
I think I went at the same time as Sarah, sorry.
Okay, yeah, just making sure. The sound of the voices matter. Just wanted to have that clear for folks. Okay, we're in good shape. We have today's agenda is kind of a single topic thing, but different than the previous. We've had a couple single topic meetings that were about evaluation. This is actually going back to the conversation around what in the heck do we do with the STR tax fund and how do we sort of make those solicitations as structured and as transparent as possible. We'll get to that in a second. But apologies in advance. I do have 3 sets of minutes that I put in your packet that I just now got the ability to sort of go through and scrub. That I hope they're pretty darn close to correct. I think it's May, August, and September. So if folks have had a chance to review that, it'd be great to hear that they look good, or if there are specific sort of meeting minutes that you want to correct, we can pull those off. But I would love to hear an approval or any corrections to the minutes that were included in your packet.
Move to approve just so we can get the ball rolling. I'll second that. They look great.
I just the September 30th minutes, there were 2 statements that were attributed to me that I don't think it said.
Okay.
I can email them to you.
Yes.
Okay.
So we will essentially get Emily's corrections on the September minutes and otherwise consider them approved. And so I will obviously make sure the final version reflects those attribution changes.
Okay.
That sound good?
Good.
Everybody good? Awesome. So I will go ahead and share for this next one. Apologies in advance. You're getting the long version of a presentation that Gates and I have been working on for a couple of weeks. We're having a conversation with you all today, but this is really kind of a precursor to a conversation that we're having with City Council on December 9th as part of their work session. As you'll recall, and I think the memo sort of talks about this, this group has talked about how to handle the solicitation, whether it be targeted RFPs or an open rolling cycle or solicitation. Council clearly directed staff that they wanted to see this sort of open and rolling solicitation process with more structure to it than exists today. And so we're probably going for more breadth than depth today, just so that you all can kind of maybe begin to see what the complete picture would look like. If we had more than 90 minutes, we would dive in a whole lot deeper. But we also wanted to have this conversation and our conversation with council on the 9th before diving all the way deep. Like if someone says we don't want to do a letter of an intent phase, Gates and I aren't going to work on what would be in a letter of intent, what's required for that submittal. So part of this is just to understand where there may be headwinds and tailwinds as it relates to kind of where we dive in deeper with on this. So let me share my screen real quick. And I think folks probably know this or have pieced it together. And I think the memo states it. For any number of reasons, we were looking for a way to add some capacity to the planning department to work through this process and structure. So we've hired Gates to help out with that. And so you'll hear from both Gates and I kind of throughout today's conversation, and as well as with any other future conversations that we have. Let me get this going.
Did you see Kaylee's waiting?
Yes, I think she just,
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
How do you want to handle feedback on this?
I was gonna say that, so, I don't know, what was it, 30 slides, there are a lot of slides. You all should stop us whenever, if you're like, I have a question, there's a bullet on this slide that is eliciting a response for me, let's do it, this is supposed to be as informal and as possible. Gates and I kind of view this as a good way to sort of float a straw proposal before it goes to council, so you all amplify, tell us we're crazy, don't do that, like whenever, I mean, I understand we're putting a lot of content in front of you and waiting to the end to a discussion period probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense, so stop us whenever, and for the folks on screen, I would just, unmute, voice, make a comment verbally or raise your hand and we'll have a lookout for you all. Does that make sense? So this is, we wanted you to sort of see kind of some general feedback that we want to hear from you all. Like there's kind of like a number of questions sort of bundled throughout this, but like we aren't asking about these specifically. So it'd be good just to get some feedback. Obviously, we're looking for all general feedback. We aren't specifically asking the geographic scope question, but obviously that has come up. It'd be good for you all to just spend a minute on that. Even if it's just like, what's the range of options? We're not really asking a minimum fund balance question, but I think we've talked about that a little bit, that does feel like an overall stewardship conversation to be had. So just note that, anything in the sort of risk profile, risk tolerance perspective that's important, particularly to communicate to council. Always good to hear about that. You all have talked a little bit about how important it would be to have standardized information as you all are doing your work, or as a future version of this committee is doing their work, and or what's presented to council, and or what's publicly available and consumable. So as you're thinking through kind of what that information should look like, always good to hear about that. And then we will be talking a little bit about fund stewardship. So any feedback there would be great too. And this is also an open call. Whatever's on your mind today. I know we've talked about this as a group a few times, sometimes with like actually specific agenda items. But one of the nice things about onboarding Gates into this project is he went back and sort of watched a bunch of your meetings. He reviewed the minutes. So in some ways we were by osmosis getting some committee feedback about what you were thinking about when you saw actual request funds. So we're able to sort of go back and reflect on, really 11 meetings worth of content to get to what we're presenting today. There is some background here that's mostly for anybody that's sort of paying attention virtually or watching this recording later. A lot of this is informed by the city's strategic plan for housing and housing action adopted in August of 2024. A lot of that strategy is about how and in what way the city organizes its capacity to make impactful investments. So this is in many ways kind of a North Star for us, including sort of understanding and pointing to the importance of partnerships, particularly partnerships with the housing authority, but as well as with other development partners that are necessary to build, develop, and maintain affordable housing throughout the community. Always good to, today's conversation is specifically about the STR tax fund and how to manage those potential assets and revenues. But always good to kind of just do a quick thumbnail about the fund. I think everybody kind of understands like its origin story is related to a ballot question that for all intents and purposes establishes base eligibility for investments for the fund in terms of like what you can and can't do, maybe more on the can side than the can side, but not an attorney. But high level, like, revenue last year was about $15 million, which is generally kind of where that number was pegged at the time of the election. I'm showing two numbers there, kind of a fund balance at the end of August, but really actually then showing you sort of end of year balance, which is not entirely going to be payments that happen in 2025, but the expected payments to the housing authority for Cottonwoods are going to be first quarter of next year. Base Camp has got multiple installments. So I'm pulling those out just to kind of give you an order of magnitude of what end of year would look like. So think $25 million at the end of this year, add $15 million next year. That's $40 million at the end of next year. Obviously without any expenses coming out of there. So just, just a quick ballpark for you all. These are all sort of things that you know already, most likely, but just so that folks kind of have a sense of this, these are all pulled from the Housing Authority's recent market demand study. 3,200 units needed to catch up and keep up over the next 10 years at all different types of sort of income levels or AMI targeting. I don't know how Emily feels about this, but I certainly tell people when they see 3,200 or 3,193, the number matters, but it's order of magnitude that matters a lot. Understand there's a lot of need across the income spectrum for obviously development of affordable and attainable housing in our community. And in reality, we have very real gaps between what can be constructed or built from a market perspective and the gap between what you can actually recover from a rent and income perspective on the same type of property. And then the thing that you see on the right-hand side is one that's actually from the Colorado Association of Ski Towns, a report they did, I don't know, 2 years ago that looked at a lot of their peer communities. And just generally sort of the big takeaway that sort of landed on us at the time was how little of our full-time residency units are in some type of regulated or restricted use relative to our peer communities. Think about us at 8% versus Telluride at 40%. I mean,
I'm sorry.
Yep.
So what is this sample grouping? Is this saying that in Aspen, I can't read the numbers off my thing, but
70% of the think about a unit that is occupied full-time by a local resident, 75% of those units actually have a restriction on them.
okay.
They're regulated in some way.
So we're
Way behind if you think of that as like how you would define our portfolio in terms of essentially having a community asset that would be available year over year.
thanks.
So these are just kind of, again, North Star type things for us.
Hey, Brad,
Yeah, go ahead, Todd.
on that last slide, so you're talking about that, is that 70% of the 56%? Is that a way you could back into that?
Yes.
Okay,
So large numbers.
yeah, ways behind.
Yep. That's takeaway. And so other takeaways, this is actually from a slide from a presentation I gave to a statewide group, I don't know, maybe a month ago. There was kind of other takeaways. Again, all things this group knows, but they're just always good reminders that our housing market is essentially detached from the local workforce. Absent, I mean, in some projects it's not, but on the whole, it is largely detached from what the local workforce can afford. If you think about our existing stock, it's 50-50 full-time occupied or seasonal vacation. So, you see a lot of units, but obviously only some of those are kind of in the full-time occupancy portfolio. We sort of talked about sort of the gap in terms of what people can afford. Most months we see that 50% of the transactions are cash buyers, which probably suggests that those are not local buyers. And that really one of the things that kind of came out of the Housing Authority's study is housing security is really about tenure, own and rent, life stage, particularly age, and when you actually sort of purchase the home on the ownership side. Obviously, the longer and the earlier you purchase the home, the more secure you are sort of month over month in terms of being able to afford your home. And then we're really seeing this major bifurcation in terms of households with really a huge growth in the over 160% AMI more earning over 160% AMI and less earning less than 160% AMI. When I was presenting this to the state, this was about essentially how communities around Colorado should assess risk displacement. And so in some ways I was suggesting this is a metric that suggests we're actually experiencing displacement already because folks that are under 160% AMI in City of Steamboat Springs are staying in the local workforce but are residing outside of the city. Again, I think this is probably all things you know already. So this is now kind of getting some recap stuff that again, you all have experienced this. So hopefully this will sound relatively familiar. Like it was important to kind of say, here's kind of how we're the fund allocation has happened so far. There was a period before this group formed that we actually made allocations, specifically Riverview and Casey's Pond. So that sort of, those are the first two awards, kind of predate the process you all have been helping out with. Then went to the RFP that was released in July, that obviously included you all's evaluation, recommendation of preliminary award for 3 projects. And then we've then, for all intents and purposes, sort of following the RFP, but have been handling unsolicited proposals that have walked in the door. So kind of what that looks like, sort of current standard process of protocol is every, proposal comes in the door. That really means it's an email to me. I generally, early consultations say just follow the RFP. The RFP should be your guidebook in terms of what you submit to the city in terms of an initial proposal. When it's generally in enough of a shape to do something with it, I typically take it to the City Council Housing Subcommittee, which has 2 members. And that basic question is like, don't do a deep evaluation of this, but tell me if you see enough that suggests it kicks off an evaluation process, because it takes my time, now Gates's time, some of Kaylee's time, it takes your time to evaluate. And if there isn't a possible green light there, like it stops at the Housing Subcommittee. We haven't really had that be the thing that sort of stops an evaluation yet. It's resulted in an application coming back that you all eventually had a conversation about. Then obviously you all do your work, which has generally kind of been in 2 steps. What I call opening the bid, like taking a look at what came in, asking yourself, what other questions do you have to evaluate? And then, a single 90-minute meeting to sort of review everything that you've received in writing, as well as a conversation with the applicant. And then from that point, it goes back to the City Council Housing Subcommittee. One of the things that sort of changed mid-process is we had a situation where you all would do your work, it would arrive back at staff to carry it to council. We were taking it to all 7. And that was not the most effective way to negotiate for open session with council, a body of 7, rather than a smaller group, sort of hearing what you all's evaluation was at the proposal, where staff's evaluation was to begin the negotiation. So for instance, we've already started the process of drafting the beginnings of deal terms for the Village Drive apartments that you all saw a while back. That was really staff sitting down with that housing subcommittee to say, here's where the subcommittee where you all landed. Here's where staff sees this. Does this feel like the beginnings of what some deal terms might look like?
Right. How specific do you guys get on deal terms in that people?
I would describe it as like kind of broad strokes. Like I see it. We'll all come to you in a second, but you're seeing your hand sort of like, when you all were talking about Village Drive apartments, there were kind of 3 things that were sort of central to sort of your evaluation. It was locking in sort of the income restriction for occupants. It was honestly how tight you felt the deal was, and how and in what way could this award make it feel a little more, the deal will feel a little bit healthier. And I've forgotten what the third, but those types of things. So essentially I've asked legal based on that, and confirmation from the housing subcommittee that was where they would want the terms to go. And so then legal drafts all the details. Go ahead, Will.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask at this juncture, because I really liked in your advanced materials, kind of one of the curiosities around a faster timeline from sort of initial concept to an award. And I think this process is really good in terms of like getting a lot of different input, but I also wondered if there was a mechanism to kill things faster, like if they're really outside the box. So I'm guessing, and that's probably the wrong language, but just like spare staff and applicants the time if a project isn't very promising. So I'm just curious if the council subcommittee at like step 1 has ever just said no, thank you.
So that's to that. I hope the process we were sort of start to share today helps a little bit with that. Essentially communicating on the front end to an applicant, your project or proposal may not be a good fit for this because there's a little bit more parameters set up. And well, the only one that the subcommittee essentially flagged and said should not advance to evaluation was the first proposal as submitted by the Steamboat Mountain School, because they were requesting 100% of development cost. And that's a base sort of no-go. I said this to me, the city is not going to fund a city employee project using 100% STR tax funds. The ballot language clearly sort of describes it as a contribution, which to me suggests 99% or less. I mean, it is not the full cost to develop, and really what that worked, and you will see this a little bit in the process that we're showing. It's like that wasn't kill it all together. That was like you've got to rethink your proposal here to even have a pathway for consideration. Does that help?
Thanks, that's very helpful.
And since you mentioned it, we've been generally, last couple of weeks hasn't been too bad, but I mean, there have been months where I'm having two conversations with developers a week about the fund. And I typically tell them you're at like 6 months from walk in the door with a proposal to appropriation. I'm not quite sure if this process that we're going to lay out like actually speeds that up all that much, but hopefully there's just a little bit more understanding of the process. And as we get more experienced, I think in some ways that will help as well. And then, you know, one of the things that creates the timing challenge is just honest council schedule. I mean, that's, you know, the agendas are full weeks and months out. And so when I get to the point where like, oh, this is actually ready for grant award and appropriation, I may miss 2 meetings and have to go to the 3rd meeting before I can get it scheduled. Anyone that sort of works through planning commission and council sort of understands what it's like to get on those agendas. So thumbnail, kind of where things stand. I mentioned the 2 awards. The Riverview has actually already been paid back to us. It was a loan that is already, obviously, folks already kind of understand that situation. So that payback has come back to us. Obviously 2025 for Base Camp and for Cottonwoods. And the other ones I'm just showing is preliminary because they've come through this committee but haven't gone all the way to appropriation. Childcare workforce is kind of in a special case, like it's still a project that's being worked on. So there hasn't been really any additional conversation since your 2024 review of that proposal is reviewed and during the RFP process. And then you all this year have seen and made preliminary award recommendations for both Milner Park and Village Drive. So 22 units averaging about $128,000 of award per unit. So as Gates and I were sort of thinking about this, like we thought it was pretty important to like, we both sort of walked into like what we were developing with some assumptions. Some of it informed by previous conversation with you, some of it informed by previous conversations with council, some of it probably our own biases. So I wanted to like make sure you all sort of understood those and so that like we could surface them in case there's anything here that you said perhaps shouldn't be an assumption. You know, we are still working from the assumption that Brown Ranch remains sort of an unparalleled opportunity to address affordable housing and respond to the affordable housing issue in our community. So that's kind of a given. But the reality of the development timeline suggests that it may not be ripe to call it something for an investment of funds for a few years out. We have to grow the city's capacity to be able to do this work. And in general, the housing strategy said that as of September or August 2024, we probably needed another 2.5 to 3 FTE just to like do the admin, keep the work going, do the detailed work that's needed to push out $15 million a year to call it something, much less all the policy work that was sort of accounted for in the housing strategy. The other one that's been sort of important to Gates and I, we talked about this, is we have a 20-year funding source, but we also are sort of working from the assumption like we may be in a place where we want to scale up and sunset this program in a matter of 5 years. If Brown Ranch comes online, there's another sort of commitment of the voters of what a future allocation might look like. We may get to a point where we get to maturity and essentially have to unwind the program relatively quickly because there's been a community decision about allocation more so than what we're proposing here. And we can talk about kind of what that means in terms of what we're proposing. Because of that 5-year window and other things, like the extent to which we can take the current pipeline, whether that be development projects with planning approvals or like actively being worked on and reposition those to include some type of attainable or affordable housing, makes sense to really think of that as an area of emphasis. This is said in the housing strategy, but key assumption is that like it's going to take an ecosystem of partners and programs to deliver on the spectrum of need or demand that's sort of present in the community. Clear that the community expects transparency in both the evaluation of investments and monitoring the impact and compliance going forward. That the fund should drive desired outcomes versus reacting to market opportunities. Like it should be clear on the front end what we're trying to accomplish, and the reality that like the benefit and the risk must be detailed enough to be well understood by all types of audiences. I talked about this. There's at least 3 audiences that have to be considered here. There's the people sitting in your seats, there's council, and there's the general public. And they need to be able to consume all the information, or at least the key pieces of information that are associated with this work.
So Brad, as this fund kind of takes form and builds out, is there any appetite? You know, where a lot of the packet talks about partners, so on and so forth. The city actually going out and soliciting partners like Corman, for instance, that's a 20-year loan that's been repaid. That seems like a perfect partner to do more deals with.
So I'll mention this a little bit later, but yes, the answer to that is yes. In any grant program, whether you think about philanthropy, giving away $15 million a year isn't an easy task. Even if our average award is relatively high, you always have to be out there cultivating applicants and partners, right? Like that's an important piece of this. That's part of like why end up talking to developers. I will take any cold call from a developer so that they understand the mechanics of basically how this works, because they may present themselves a year later with an actually relatively investable deal. So yeah, there's a lot of time spent in that space. I mean, Gates interviewed, I don't know, 13 or 14 folks. Some of those are existing local governments. So some of those are other housing authorities. Some are potential recipients of funds. So yes, that's a big part of the work. So here's generally kind of where things stand. Gates has kind of been onboarding and working since sort of September, October timeframe. I mentioned, probably 13 or so interviews, reviewing kind of your previous conversations. We talked about this. Obviously, we have today's conversation. Gates and I have a hard time predicting how many check-ins we may have with council. We have one on December 9th, but we are essentially describing 4 different programs here, 6 different programs here, depending on how you want to think about it. The extent to which we have to go back each time with a very detailed program design conversation with council will determine how many check-ins that we have. But in general, we kind of want to be open for business and operating the portions of this structure that are ready to go by spring of next year. And we are in no way sort of shutting the door. Like if an application walks in the door today, we will continue to sort of accept and receive those. And similarly, we are having conversations with potential recipients for both sort of traditional vertical development, to call it something, also purchase of deed restriction concurrent to these conversations. We are both building the airplane in flight and flying it sort of deal. So like sometimes in some ways it's helpful to actually have a community partner that you can work with to say, here's how we're thinking this is going to work. With this work in your case? We're doing some sort of case studies sort of along the way to sort of make sure that we're designing and calibrating for our own local community. So just there could be realities where there are awards made even before program design guidelines are final.
Are you thinking that this committee would shape to determine a housing committee around the programming?
Yeah, so I was going to say that. So we have you on here once. I suspect at minimum, we would probably want to have another meeting first quarter of next year of this group. Our recommending council has to bless this, but we will suggest, and it says on the slides later, that, we called you an ad hoc committee. This is your 12th meeting. I feel like I've already taken enough of your ad hoc time, and that we need to have a standing board or commission that would come on board at the same time that this new program would come on board. And importantly, they would have a charge that's to be determined. There's no committee description that's been written for that. Council would have to sort of bless, obviously what they do, and that obviously impacts, who would be, what the application would look like and what the qualifications, would look like. But fair to assume that they would end up having a broader charge. They would just be the board or the commission that advises council potentially on all things housing, right? Maybe that's the group that helps us finalize in detail what an inclusionary zoning linkage fee program looks like, evaluates how that's doing 2 years after effective date, that sort of thing. So they would have a role over and above this role of evaluating STR requests. All good? Consider that a natural pause? Okay. So these are all things that really have come from you all, so hopefully they sound familiar. I won't spend a ton of time on these. But obviously, Bill and I were talking about risk even before the meeting got started, so clearly important to understand and evaluate risk. Similarly, sort of understanding the security of city funds. In your conversations and other conversations, we've heard how important it is for the funds to evolve back to the degree that they can. And you all obviously have mentioned many times that you're getting applications and proposals that have some similar information, but a lot of maybe more dissimilarity than similarity. So standardizing sort of across the board is obviously something we should aim for. This is sort of where Willow's comment was going. We should be as efficient and as quick as we possibly can be, whether that's getting to know quicker or getting to yes quicker, either way, or maybe a strong, the long maybe is what we're looking to avoid. The other thing that you all mentioned in one of your earlier conversations on this is we were having a conversation in this committee about, do continuous and targeted RFPs make sense? Or do we want a rolling solicitation? And the thing that you all talked about is like, that rolling process is amazing on the applicant side, but you can understand on the capacity internally to run that would be potentially problematic. Cause like if you're getting them on a natural cadence that you can plan for, it's one thing, but if you get three a week, 3 in a matter of 3 weeks, that are now potentially running on the same clock, obviously there are capacity issues there. And then I think that's a long list of things that really we should be trying to get out of each of those types of investments. And so Gates conducted most of these interviews. I was in maybe 4 of them, so I will cover this, Gates, but if you see anything that you want to sort of amplify, please do. Some of this is kind of already seen already, like define the fund goals early, communicate them clearly. I will say this is landing on me a lot lately because I'm having more and more conversations with potential partners who are saying, what does the city want? And we've approached it from what do you like? What works for your side of the deal? Like we it's been this sort of back and forth of understanding how to best position ourselves there. So we have been sort of leaning into being flexible and adapting as we can. The third and fourth bullets are probably the things that feel like a change based on current practice relative to what we've heard in the interviews. In the interviews, it was be the first money in. That's how you maximize your impact is to actually set the stage very early for a deal or a transaction that's going to help you meet your needs. We've been doing we've been very much last money in, figuring out how to take almost a ripe development project and essentially making it whole on the financing side of things, kind of the last piece of the stack.
I will say we heard that from a lot of different folks too, across the housing community. That a fund like this doesn't have the same requirements that like private money does. And so we should really use it to be strategic and really like drive projects forward rather than waiting until they're already in the ground. Subsidizing.
And I mean part of it has been for me is it was clear sort of early on that like council was maybe not quite sure how to have the risk conversation. So the best way that I felt like we could mitigate risk was to essentially have the funding be deployed as late in the development process as possible. We've had that conversation with things that you've been evaluating, and I sort of took it as Well, you could simply communicate to a development partner, look how healthy this fund is. Right? When you're ready to like get all close to the finish line, we should still be ready. Like we have a healthy fund balance. But to Gates's point, we heard it's probably better to show $3 million early than showing that you have a healthy fund balance of $30 million that you would want to access, that they would access later.
Well, and it seems like, I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Seems like most of these people are asking for the money for equity anyway. So it needs to go in first. And I would say the trade-off on that is rather than providing bullet points and kind of generic information to us to make a decision, that's where you need to have the detailed analysis on the front end to make the decision to give the money on the front end, right? Because you're not gonna piecemeal together information.
That's what I was gonna say.
The funds are out the door.
Yeah, city hasn't been equipped to do the underwriting to enable this kind of
Right.
really riskier investment, but that's part of the proposal now.
Is that saying that, is this proposing that a commitment would come for the money early, or we're actually handing out funds that we may never see again to projects that may never happen, or both? What
Perhaps,
is this
perhaps
saying?
both. But we'll step through this, but you will probably get the sense that we're suggesting that both may be the reality.
Interesting.
Not, I mean, to selected partners.
Sure.
Right. With proper structure.
Yeah, not to like anybody that walks.
Blows into town and like has, like, yeah, something that sounds too good to be true.
Sure. Yeah. Crazy. Such a left turn from what we've been doing.
And when part of what we've been doing, I mean, I will admit, and like part of it was really we have absent some other structure other than the RFP, like the RFP has been our structure. And that was clearly, I mean, go back in time. What that RFP was is Brown Ranch annexation fails at the ballot box. We have a healthy fund balance. We have an immediate need. Let's make sure and emphasize in this RFP that we're looking to invest in affordable housing that can be delivered in 0 to 3 years. That suggests entitled projects or, well on their way to being entitled projects. So in some ways, we kind of built that box for ourselves. And so there may be a chance to sort of step out and ask, is that still the same sort of structure that we
But
is most impactful?
importantly, this isn't saying that these investments should happen to the exclusion of the late stage stuff. It's just that there's a place for this in the portfolio.
Well,
And at some point, you're gonna be out of late stage stuff. At some point,
Yeah.
everything that is even in someone's brain is going to have gone through the exercise of thinking about these funds.
I think too, a lot of real estate financing is moving to private credit. And private credit sophisticated. And not to disparage us, but we're kind of the opposite of sophisticated. So I don't think we should be bashful in asking hard questions up front. And then fine, if the answers to those hard questions are acceptable, then fund the money at the beginning. That's that's fine. But people aren't walking into banks or into Apollo or Blue Owl or whomever is doing private credit and just saying, yeah, I've got a proposal for 20 apartments in Steamboat. I'll make them 120% of AMI. Can I have $5 million? No.
Yes.
There's a lot more.
Yeah. And we heard, I mean, this to Kelly's point, like from our interviews, if you can have your elected body make early decisions and funding decisions on the like at the appropriation end of things, but a lot of the like evaluation and key sort of funding and admin decisions happening, sort of, let's call it the staff or something other than council level, that would be most expedient and most helpful from an efficiency standpoint. And more predictable, yes, yep. Some other sort of from our interviews. Go ahead, please, Emily.
I
Yep.
think someone's trying to talk.
Oh, is that you, Tom? Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we're talking about risk and we're talking about coming into early stage development projects. And I think that a big part of this conversation comes into the management of the whole portfolio. Because I think taking additional risk for the purpose of utilization, the purpose of taxpayer dollars is, man, that's something that I just don't, it seems a little disconnected for me, right? So if those are the types of things that we're going to look at doing, I think that allocating a smaller portion of the portfolio to that kind of a profile is something that we should strongly consider.
Yeah, Todd, that's something that we've been, I don't know if we say this directly in the slides. But one of our takeaways has been, let's say that you can slice this fund up in 6 different activities. Do not hardwire those with program level budgets. Like, set some pretty basic funding targets, your general sense of how and what way the funds would be allocated sort of on the whole across that portfolio of 6 things, understanding each of the 6 things may have a dozen activities or deals in them, and try just, sort of find your way through it for a while and see if that's feeling right in terms of what you're thinking your allocations are going to look like.
So, Brad, so funding the early stage money, so you can sort of, we came up with a few that were 120 to 150 AMI. Like, if you're putting the money in up front, do you feel that gives you more of an opportunity to pick like 80% AMI projects or 60 because that's what you really want? In a sense, you're working with a partner, you're funding them, but you have, rather than taking something that's prepackaged and saying we want a chunk of it, do you feel that gives you the chance to kind of be part of the packaging up front? Or
That and the extent to which the deal becomes better because our money is in early in terms of when they're sourcing the other parts of their stack.
right,
Like, if there's an early commitment and how those subsequent sort of equity partners, to call it something, might advise sort of what's associated with our commitment. I mean, those types of things. Yes, just have a conversation that's much earlier and actually formulating what the deal is and what the project is. I think has sort of, multiple tentacles there that probably are helpful rather than waiting to we were getting into very much a take it or leave it is what we're getting. Late stage feels take it or leave it. It's got to be this. If it's not this, like, they don't see a pathway, we don't see a pathway, and that's got obviously some challenges with it.
Well, and just to say put one other point, typically when you're looking at risk associated at different stages of investing, if you're going to be on the front end of an investment profile, then the benefit has to be greater. If you're going to be on the back end of a funding profile and you're going to be taking less risk, then maybe your benefit isn't going to be as great. So I think that's something that needs to be weighed as well.
Yeah, you'll see
make
this
sense?
reference later, Todd. Like we describe. I mean, there's how the award is structured, whether it's a loan, a grant, or something that feels more like an equity position, is
Yeah.
also things that we ought to be thinking about.
Okay.
Us as well. That's a one.
Yeah. So this is the first bullet's kind of like one. I think maybe if there was a headline takeaway, it was probably this. I mean, I think we knew this already, but the reality is to like administer and service this fund and the individual awards that would come out of the fund, like is not a cheap enterprise, and frankly, the city is probably not well positioned to do that. And so we're going to have to think about what a financial services partnership might look like to do that ongoing administration and services. And the other thing that in terms of the folks that Gates has talked to on this topic, the other thing that's I think helpful in that is they can kind of give us a sense of how like maybe the market is changing, so that even before we are beginning to see applications, they can understand like what it means to actually build this product type in Colorado. So in some ways we can get some pretty specific and early intel on just how the landscape may be changing.
And potentially connect us with their funding effort too.
Yes,
the
true.
funding networking.
Yep. We talked about revolving. We're gonna have, like we've done a little bit of communications around this, but we're probably gonna really up our communications game. I mentioned this idea of trying to get to program maturity relatively quickly. Like, don't reinvent the wheel. We have promising practice in Colorado that we can essentially calibrate to our context. And it feels like there is an ecosystem of development partners that's already out there and is willing to sort of spend time with us as we are finalizing program guidelines in part so that they can be sort of earlier adopters and early recipients of these funds. So a little bit about sort of defining fund goals. This is again kind of some takeaways from the interviews. You know, pretty important to describe what you're trying to solve, what tools you're using and why, and really understanding that risk and benefit. So thinking about that, we generally kind of arrive. These are kind of straw goals that we just sort of threw out there to get that again are almost like how we are approaching this. Happy to hear any input on this. The reality is we have needs across the income spectrum. And so there probably should be some targeting, but the reality is like the market is failing in many ways at many income levels. And so we need to think about a pretty diverse portfolio there. We do need to balance preservation and converting existing units with essentially creation of new units. We talked about this already, but like we want this to be simple and quick and the opportunity to leverage impact. Don't have 20 products, have 4, 5, 6 products, dial them in, make them very efficient and transparent to deliver. One of the things that will be take some time with council is there are no perfect deals. There's a deal. That's why we talk about it being investable, feeling like it will have, we expect it to have the outcomes that we want it to have, community benefit, but like there will always be things that you could fine tune. And the Gates mentioned this earlier, like we really need to up our game in terms of having much more rigorous underwriting and for across the spectrum of awards, but particularly on that sort of earlier or riskier side of the portfolio. So we kind of have sort of, in terms of that product mix, we kind of are describing kind of 6 types of activities. As noted on the slide, the basic assumption here is all of these things are eligible or should be eligible for STR tax funds. So that obviously shapes how they would be structured. And so you can kind of see these, you know, buy down and plan units, like direct development of units, preserving existing affordable units. And you can think of that as a unit with a restriction that's expiring and extending the restriction, or you can think about this as, you know, further buy downs of units, that sort of thing, direct land banking, purchase of deed restrictions and partnerships. And the next slide kind of maybe pulls these together. I sort of alluded to this earlier, that top line, there could be sort of 3 types of investments that are sort of going out the door. Some may feel like a grant or a subsidy, some may feel like a loan or debt financing, some may feel like an equity position in a project such that the city is actually expecting return to some degree. Land donation leases, shared appreciation, which if Gates explained it to me, I get it, but he can take another shot at it, and credit enhancements as well. And that credit enhancements is really part of that sort of early commitment conversation as well. So as we thought about this, like if you take those 6 sort of primary product types, we think there are probably 2 that sort of sit outside of what this group has been doing. If you think about kind of what that solicitation process looks like, one would be that purchase of deed restriction. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about what that program means. But the other would be actually like city direct land banking. We're going out and acquiring property specifically for the purpose of affordable housing. We can talk a little bit more about that. Versus these other 4 probably sit inside that rolling solicitation process. So purchase of deed restrictions, these are programs that exist in other communities in Colorado where, you know, you're essentially paying a current property owner for the value of a restriction. So it's just that they then place the corresponding restriction on their property. But this can kind of happen in a couple of different ways. It can be, think of it as you're an existing owner who voluntarily wants to place a restriction on your unit. You are monetizing the value of that restriction. You can use those proceeds however you feel. You could do an improvement to your property. You could bank it, all those sorts of things, or it could act almost like a jumbo down payment assistance. There is a market rate unit on the market. You qualify for this program. You receive a relatively large down payment assistance for the purposes of placing that restriction on the property at the time of that transaction. And the reason that we're describing these as largely fitting outside of the solicitation is that they're relatively formulaic in terms of how they work. It's really just based on the value of the property and the type of restriction on it. We do, this is pretty common for communities to establish essentially a max value of a restriction, like, you know, you may pay up to 25%, but you really are only going to pay $200,000 is the max that someone can receive. So we need to figure out kind of where that math is. And the restrictions tend to be light in terms of local workforce only, or with something like an appreciation count.
Do you have to trade your property to acquire these, or can a homeowner say, I'm gonna put a deed restriction on, I'd like my 150?
Correct. Yep.
So
There does not have to be a change of ownership.
Okay.
it doesn't have to be, but in terms of who you prioritize,
Right.
like Whale for a while, when they had tons of interest, they were doing trading first.
Right.
And then if there was no one buying a new unit requesting the funds, then someone who wanted to convert their existing unit
Okay.
could get in.
Makes sense. There's some will have scheme. Not me.
And so the first couple, well, all of these are kind of informed by folks that have run the peer programs. You know, to really think about having a flexible version of the program, to have the restriction that's recorded, but also it has some policy guidance that can be a little bit more nimble. Similar to what I said earlier, this is council approves the program and the policies, perhaps sets a funding target, but like the actual administration and execution of this sits at the staff level, in part because ideally someone walks in the door with a request and a transaction can be supported a month from now, 6 weeks from now, 2 months from now, relatively quick, fit in within that closing period. And then our general sense is that we would probably set a relatively ambitious funding target for the whole the whole fund of maybe 20% for the first couple of years, because there could be a lot of interest early on, and then it probably will taper off. But early on, there may be a way. This is a way to sort of catch up on that sort of share of our portfolio that's deed restricted by acquiring restrictions.
Well, and to Todd's point too, by nature, these are just different risk profiles. You know, paying someone to deed restricted property is relatively low risk. Giving someone equity money up front on a construction project is relatively high risk.
Correct.
So
Yep.
you get your diversity through your programs that you choose to pursue.
So, and then on the sort of city direct land banking, the reason we feel like this sort of sits outside is we already have like in our charter, like what happens when the city purchases, disposes, leases the property, and that's all kind of, that structure's already there. Obviously, the second the STR tax fund hits an acquisition, it is for the purposes of building affordable or attainable housing. You know, really at the land banking stage, you probably maybe have some general understanding of what a future development program has, but you couldn't really do sort of detailed and rigorous underwriting around the project. And, you know, not surprising, oftentimes of the essence. And so we wouldn't want to disadvantage the city as a buyer by having essentially a prolonged acquisition process. So that's why we're saying that sort of sits off to the side. All right, Gates, I'm going to give you 4 slides to share the community your brain and this logic flow. It makes sense to me, but I would love for you to like talk about the general sort of processes we're talking about, and then a little bit about roles.
Sure. So, I mean, this is basically taken from like modifying the existing process. The first step is somebody reaches, well, the first step before this that's not on the chart is all the engagement and community awareness that we're talking about, where you're basically like building your funnel, almost like a sales funnel, you know, and making sure people know about this. And then if somebody comes in and says that they're interested, I mean, it'll probably start with emails, but then we want to get to more of a formalized standard letter of intent that has very specific information about the project that gives us enough of a picture that we kind of understand the full deal. And staff does an initial review, and there's a couple different things where they would be reviewing for. The first is just threshold criteria. And that's, you know, is this a reasonable partner to work with? Are there major red flags? And then once we get past that, make sure it aligns with the program. I mean, it's just kind of giving this the smell test. Meetings with the applicant, make sure that they have the track record and capacity, et cetera. And it's either going to be okay or not. And if it's not, then we're suggesting that we could work with that applicant. I mean, it's not going to be possible in all cases, but where possible, work with them, potentially with the housing subcommittee to improve their application. You know, if it's like programmatic and not to the developer capacity or something, then we could work with them to improve that application. And so we get to a point where we say, okay, the LOI seems like it could be fundable, then go ahead. Next slide. So then we invite them to submit a full application, and this includes detailed financials, detail whatever kind of attachments they have, if they have plans, if they have entitlements, looking at project readiness. I mean, do they have control of the land, et cetera? Just a very kind of complete application. And the idea is then there would be parallel evaluations that would happen after that gets submitted. So staff would have their role, and that's kind of, again, looking at their eligibility, making sure that it's a complete application, and thinking about the community impact, kind of the quality of the project, some of those subjective things. And then we are proposing that we hire a sophisticated partner, some kind of a financial services firm. There's a lot of firms that are specific to affordable housing programs, and they would do the underwriting, look at the pro forma, do the risk assessment, and basically give us a credit memo in a standardized format. And also bring this to the housing subcommittee, and their lane is basically policy alignment and community benefit. So we have 3 different parallel reviews happening, and we go to the next one. And so then the idea is this comes to a committee like this one, and for every project, you get a standardized write-up on the project. So here's the summary, here's the credit memo, here's, what else do I have? I mean, probably something about, does this support the city's strategic goals? So that it's really standardized, and you can have then a structured conversation about the criteria of this application, and then the committee gives it a recommendation or not, and then it goes to city council. I have not thought about whether you would want to do an in-person interview with every applicant, or if just having that standardized packet would be enough. I think that's maybe a question for you all. Again, we want to be as efficient as possible. If we could do it with one committee meeting, that's probably better, but maybe for a big ask, it's 2. I don't know. Those are details that we haven't gotten to yet. But then, so with your recommendation, that becomes another piece in that standardized packet that probably gets a lot of the details stripped out and then goes to city council. And we're also talking about adding this additional context from the dashboard, which Brad is working on developing. And that's just building a public information database where we can see what the impact of the fund has been on kind of a rolling basis, so that you can see cumulatively and where this project would fit in. So Brad showed that chart that shows housing need at all the different AMI levels. For instance, if 10 projects happened at the 60% AMI level, and this is another one, maybe that's not going to be as high priority for funding as something at 120, what am I missing? Nothing?
Nope, good. The summary of roles.
You want me to do this too?
Yeah, please, yeah.
This is just kind of how we're thinking about it. I mean, you can see it kind of, there's a lot that staff is dealing with here. Staff is the one that is working directly with applicants to get the application and refine it. Staff is working with financial services partner to feed them the application and then get that credit memo back. Staff is administering the program, doing their own application review, working on the community awareness, trying to cultivate new projects. And then we have the new housing committee, and you would be making recommendations to city council. And there should be a role, I mean, as Brad said, for the committee to also be making recommendations on new programs and policies. So there'd be a conversation there too. And then city council of keeping them in their lane again. So hopefully they're not the ones going deep dive into the pro formas and negotiating deal points. We keep them at policies, programs, kind of establishing what those targets are, but again, being flexible with those so that if one target for a program is $4 million, but then something really attractive comes in, then you can still fund it. You know, maybe next year you look at kind of underweighting that part of the fund. The idea is, again, just everybody plays their own role and you're not kind of overlapping.
Thoughts on any or all of that?
Well, I guess I like having a professional analysis, like a qualified financial partner, whoever that might be. And I gotta say, my favorite part of your whole discussion tonight is like kind of front load city council so that you guys have, as a larger, newer, bigger staff, have much more autonomy. So, you know, I mean, just watching those meetings where you get in there and it's like, you know, all this hard work everyone's done for months becomes a bickering match and you're like, you know, it's on at the last minute. So I think as much of that as you can get out of the way and handle at the staff level, better for keeping the pipeline going and also just for confidence for people applying personally. That's what I think would be good.
Is council, have they been receptive to providing committees with enough autonomy to, if a project came through, checked all the boxes, staff praised it and went sailing through, and we said, fantastic, this is the best project that ever made, that was ever come up with. Does it go to council, and is that something that they have a history of being able to wrap their minds around and say, yep, that's it, we're done?
Totally fair question.
By the way, changing on Tuesday.
That was my first caveat is like, you know, you get a council for 2 years, then you get a next council for 2 years. But what Gates is sort of laid out here is as we advance program maturity, particularly, let's think of this as 6 things. They're only really going to see 4.
Yeah.
If we have an application that walks in the door that sort of passes every check, it's so squarely within that box. To me, there's a version of this where it appears on a council agenda and it is a grant agreement and a budget appropriation and skips the step that Chris was talking about let's negotiate deal terms in open session.
Yep.
Right.
Like multiple times over. And that's, you know, but there's a lot that's got to go right on that sort of glide path to get there. But I certainly think it's doable, particularly if you, I find that the thing, people love and hate structure.
Right.
Like that's just the reality, but like, hopefully this sets enough of a structure up that like, it actually shapes the types of applications and the types of projects that we see so that a little bit of the sort of negotiation, futzing, whatever the word is that happens with deal points, will feel less like a big topic because it will have already been we will never have seen it in the first place because the applicant would have realized there's probably not a path here for what I'm thinking of.
Because that's the way I see it is a template would be established. And that's the glide path that you describe as, oh, look, Gates did that, so that's how I'm gonna do it.
Right.
And his worked beautifully, so that's what we're gonna do.
And it's, I mean, that's Village Drive, for better or worse, walked in the door because they just said, like, give me the Gorman deal.
Yeah, right.
Right? So like every time you do this, you set something that feels like hopefully positive precedent because it's like, no, this can be done. This is generally where you can expect your award amount to fall. And here's the general expectations of performance. I think in some ways that hopefully that picks up the velocity sort of from conception all the way through award.
Well, no one's taking apart roads and bridges budget at a meeting. Like,
Yeah.
let's talk about that curve. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, they have a budget.
Yeah.
Like, that would be nice if this were set up somewhere.
Todd, do you have something you wanted to add?
I have a whole handful of comments. I just don't know if this is the best time to put them out there.
Go for it.
All right. First of all, I just want to say good job. I feel like that, man, it seems like between now and the last meeting, we've gained some serious traction. We got a timeline that's laid out, made a huge progress. So Brad and your team, thank you. And Gates, I think that's fantastic. Just a couple comments, going back to talking about risk, I think that when we look at risk, you need to start allocating percentages of something relative to this total bucket, 25, $35 million, whatever it is, it's sitting in this fund. How much are we putting to rent? How much are we putting to ownership? How much are we allocating to specific AMI percentages? I think those are all specific things that are very difficult to measure and quantify at this point in time, but things to just keep in mind. I think the reliance on an outside credit agency or credit underwriting agency to do the credit work is great, but I would highly, highly suggest that somebody within staff, if not already highly trained or some qualification on credit analysis, should go to a class. There are a ton of classes out there, commercial banking type underwriting classes. Having an understanding of how balance sheets, P&Ls, and cash flow statements work is going to be great support for the city to analyze and kind of validate this this outside resource that's going to be providing a huge service to the city in allocation of these funds. Interviews, I think they're great. In fact, I think they should be absolutely mandatory in setting a dollar amount associated with those. Some of these programs maybe not necessary, but if somebody's coming in and asking for 500,000, $1 million, $2 million, we should definitely have a face-to-face interview because I think that's a critical point of allocation of public funds to just have a great conversation and get a feel what these people are really about. Again, I want to caution on early stage investing. I do not think that that's necessarily a place for public funds to be getting involved in unless we have a huge benefit, small dollar allocations, large benefits associated with them. But just a couple comments as we're going through this. It is a ton of information. I think this is fantastic. Good job. Those are just my thoughts.
Awesome. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. Well, good.
No, thanks.
Yep. We'll keep rolling. So some other general recommendations that we've kind of been part of this process so far is obviously thinking about how investments can support deeper affordability than standard. I forget the sort of figure that gets thrown around for Aspen but they essentially are at like 18% rather than 30% of monthly household. I mean, they just realized like what it actually costs to live there, that the rules, the metrics, the general rules of thumb actually don't work in that community anymore. We probably should sort of feel the same, that 100% AMI here is, some form of market, but not a form of market that feels affordable to folks. This is what Todd was just talking about. In addition to the partner side, we got to sort of level up the sort of expertise, both on kind of an external partner, but also internally as well. I sort of mentioned this already, like the extent that we can just borrow, and I'm not a big copy paste person, but copy paste calibrate, yes. Like figure out what works, what we can get to maturity really quick, so that again we could be sitting on $40 million over the next 2 years, and to be able to put those funds to work as clearly and quickly as possible would be good. We talked about sort of just making sure the program structure is as clear as possible. This kind of gets to Steve's point, just so that the expectations are set early with an applicant. I think that essentially expedites all things. Even if it doesn't feel like a fit for them, they maybe have gotten to a no before they even spent more than 10 minutes like thinking through whether there's a path for them. This is kind of this first bullet. Chris said it really well, and I'll talk about it a little bit. In our sort of interview process, we've heard from multiple sort of developer partners that have stayed on the sidelines, in part due to what they viewed as the potential for reputational risk, in the sense of like negotiating with counsel in open session for when you're actually trying to, in your estimation, to do the right thing and define every sort of deal term as being sort of positioned that like, if it's a win for the developer, it's $1 in the developer's pocket versus acknowledging that this is a real estate production strategy. You actually have to build things for us to address our affordable housing issue. So therefore, all manner of development partners are needed, and some of them are going to make a profit along the way. But like if we do the underwriting right, we will understand kind of what this win-win proposition looks like. Talked about it already, but we've got to adjust and adapt. I think there's a version of this program that exists today, and let's call it first month of year 2, but it could be a different program the first month of year 5. Perhaps it informs sort of what allocation might look like to a future development project at Brown Ranch. Maybe it gets entirely exploded, and there's a whole new way of thinking to support that opportunity. And then we talked about this, like the extent that which staff can administer, particularly if, to Steve's point, it's easy to sort of track what's going on behind the scenes so that the public and decision makers can see that there's transparency and there's rigor that's happening. If we can do that, hopefully we can operate relatively independently and be efficient as well. We talked about this a little bit, and sort of this was one of the things that Todd sort of was just talking about the sort of the early in or early stage investment. I mean, we have generally as we have talked about this, I can't sit here and name the partners, but it's a relatively limited set of community partners, known entities in our community that have developed successfully, developed affordable workforce housing successfully, that would even have a pathway to this. This would be a hard thing for a new partner to emerge and have, let's call it, an early commitment. And hopefully that underwriting helps mitigate some of the risk. We talked about revolving. That's pretty important. And Gates was sort of alluding to this. Just think about overall program flexibility and think about your portfolio. Perhaps we have an average weighting of understanding where our investments are hitting across the AMI spectrum, but you may see 360% AMI deals in a row. And that's okay. But just acknowledge that and sort of track that over time so that your overall investment targets are hitting kind of a general average. So again, here's the feedback that we were looking for today. I know like geographic scope is when we've sort of asked you all before. Anything about minimum fund balance, anything, we talked a little bit about risk. I'm happy to talk more about that. You all have seen information previously that has not been standardized. If you've got feedback on that, and then obviously we've had a little bit of conversation about the early commitment side of things. So this is essentially your invitation to do exactly what Todd did. If you've got 6 bullet points that are on your list based on what you prepared prior to today, what you've heard today, we'd love to hear them. Again, this is mostly to get us, Gates and I, ready for a conversation with council on the 9th. So with that, I'll turn it over to the committee with anything you all want to offer up.
I have just a general question, maybe for you guys. Bonds. If we had a new partner, development partner, this goes against what you were talking about on a previous slide. Would that, I don't know how difficult or easy they are to obtain, but that would be okay, if you can come to the equation with a bond that would guarantee you, we might be willing to take a risk on you. I've heard you guys talk about that in the past. I just don't live in that world.
We did just get a request talking about PABs, which are something bonds,
Private activity.
private activity.
But
Yeah.
you're talking about like a guarantee on a project.
That's correct.
Okay.
Oh, that kind of bond.
Yeah.
Oh, that's.
So
fine.
I'm saying
Got it.
Right.
we have a new player who wants to come in and do wonderful things, and we say, we only work with established players unless you have a bond.
Or guarantee.
Right, something along those lines.
Or it's a contingent commitment until they, build out their whole stack or who knows.
Right. I guess a couple of ways to scan.
I mean, that's just something you have to purchase typically, right? I mean, there's a cost with that.
And letter of credit or something like that. But
So you have to have the equity somewhere, in which case you might not be asked.
Well, thanks for that.
The difficult thing is you don't want to throw more hurdles up,
Right.
no, but if someone's asking for money up front, I say this every single meeting, like a personal repayment guarantee. Like if you believe in what you're doing and you're asking for money, I mean, there's ways that can burn off. as milestones are met, it doesn't have to be signing in blood for $5 million till someone's living in the unit.
Right.
That can burn off upon 50% completion, 100% completion, C of O, all kinds of parameters. But people should be willing to stand behind their projects. And I think that goes back to Todd's point too, is meeting someone face to face, looking in their eyes, tells you a lot about character. And I think a lot of this comes down to that, is we're going to be working, if our goal is to work with a small pool of highly qualified developers or investors or whomever it is, you want to establish those relationships. And, the quicker you can establish the relationship, the easier it's going to get through this committee, through city council, through whatever, because I guarantee you, if you went back to city council and you said, Gorman's come back to us for another project, they already repaid 19 years in advance the loan that we gave them on Riverview, there's going to be a whole lot of credibility there. So I think people willing to stand behind what they're requesting and kind of the face-to-face get to know you meeting, which goes into things like show us your financials, show us the due diligence you've already done. We're only funding part of this project. There's other people asking these exact same questions, so we shouldn't be bashful about, front end underwriting and due diligence.
But just to clarify, you're suggesting that any project that receives STR funds would have to put up a personal guarantee?
No, not necessarily, just depending on what the risk, profile is on that. Certainly wouldn't be necessary, but,
You have to establish
project by
a gauge
project.
for that risk.
Yeah, project by project basis.
We do that on a smaller basis a lot, but it's usually someone who's not known and who hasn't got a track record then. And it's hard to collect them sometimes, honestly. They may not be worth a lot, but, I feel like, what you're talking about with this sort of smaller pool of people who might get the early stage money, it almost has to be like a YBHA or something that has some affiliation and, ability. It wouldn't just be a random new developer.
Yeah, my guess is that is essentially, I can't tell you the criteria, but it is experience developing in this community and a track record of developing in a way that suggests future development could be oriented towards workforce or affordable if previous product has not been.
Because the risk to that is you seem to be picking favorites in if they're private providers too, so you have to balance that. Which is why YBHA or something is sort of outside of that because of the affiliation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna go down your list here and go for geographic scope. Cause that'll be easy, right?
So this is the base thing of like the taxes collected within the city of Steamboat Springs, but the ballot language says nothing about where funds can be directed. The general sort of feeling has been your basic workforce restriction talks about employment within Routt County. So that seems like in some ways about a geography larger than the city of Steamboat Springs is already codified to some degree. So the general feeling is like if it's a workforce affordable housing project in Routt County, you can make a logical leap that it is supporting housing for folks that may live, provide services to the city of Steamboat Springs. Anything outside that geography probably gets a little bit trickier. But if you all, essentially what this question is like, if this committee wants us to very clearly say to council, this committee's recommendation is funds are only expended within the city of Steamboat Springs, versus some other geography, I'd love to hear that.
Might prioritize that in my little weighting system. The other thing is, if you're thinking about alignment with, the current goals, one of the goals seems to be to suppress road traffic and not have anyone commute, in which case even like the trailer park in Milner didn't pass that sniff test. So, and I, by the way, personally have no bias against the community. I'm just saying that, if you're looking at community goals, that seems to be something people are really adamantly against, is creating more back and forth.
Well,
Just great. Sarah, I saw your hand come up. You too, Willis. We'll go to the online folks.
Hi, I was just gonna chime in on geographic scope, and I guess I'm less worried about where in the county the house is, but I'd be more worried about who lives there and I guess, kind of where they work. I don't know if Steve is in the room. I can't really see anyone at the table, but this whole STR tax really is on the backs of one industry, so I would be curious to hear what lodging thinks when it comes to geography. And, is it Route County? That people, you have to work in Route County, or do you have to work in Steamboat to get funding?
I don't see, I'm gonna answer your question sort of with a question. I
Yeah,
don't see a route where we can only keep it fenced into Steamboat Springs.
mhm.
There's just the land that's available, much of it that we would view as ideal would be affordable land that's located outside of the city of Steamboat Springs to some degree. So
Oh, yes, I totally agree with you there. My question was more, would you want there to be a requirement that, to X amount of people need to work in Steamboat Springs or work in Route County?
wow,
I think that's a great idea, Sarah.
that would it is a steamboat tax.
Right.
That would be full circle. I'd support that.
And I don't know if that's the right answer, but it is, it's on Steamboat businesses. So maybe the housing's not there, but I know these businesses really want their employees, to have somewhere to go.
Right.
Feels like we're really reinforcing the dynamic of the bedroom community and like pushing Steamboat's housing problem to other outlying communities. Like there's.
Yeah.
No matter what, I mean, that's a very real impact that Steamboat has caused really dramatic problems for the other housing markets and other communities in the region. And so I could see an argument for deploying resources, tax generated in Steamboat Springs to support housing solutions in other communities. But, at this point, I don't feel comfortable sort of requiring that then that housing would be required for the Steamboat workforce. I think to me, it's more an acknowledgement of the broader sort of regional ecosystem, the housing market, jobs. But not so much reinforcing the dynamic of sort of turning other communities within the region into Steamboat's bedroom communities.
Right. But I mean, the economics, is what it is.
Absolutely. But yeah, I also.
But no, I hear your point, Emily. I totally get it.
Yeah, I could argue it either way, because I do think there is a benefit toward keeping tax dollars where they're generated. I don't know.
It'd be difficult.
Council.
Yeah, it's
That-
hard.
that- Sarah, when you said a requirement would be, somebody in that household works in Steamboat Springs. That's what pushed me to the edge there. Cause I think that the vast majority of those households are gonna work in Steamboat Springs. That is
Well,
just.
yeah. I mean, we have 5,000 people a day that commute in, so it's likely that that's already happening, but I don't know how, those collecting the tax would feel, or if they even care. They're like, yeah, you live in Hayden, you work in Hayden, don't care.
I just Willa and then Todd.
Thank you. So I can kind of go through a bunch of topics. I thought just great job on presenting this in a way that I think has both a lot of structure and retains flexibility and variety and sort of acknowledges the reality of the array of things we probably could and should do. So I thought, really positive on the draft goals, program, and process. Geographic scope, I would just make the case that it should be Route County. That aligns with the way the current deed restriction is structured, that you work in Route County. We've already had a number of projects come forward that were outside the Steamboat City boundaries. And I think if you're going to drive towards a spectrum of housing choices and supporting the regional ecosystem, you're just kind of cutting off your nose to spite your face with how limited the development sites are within Steamboat. Like I think it's totally a both and. And I think, you know, I guess I wouldn't be, it feels like it overcomplicates things to get into the, you know, trying to regulate the cross commuting. Like cross commuting is just going to happen. And if we have more housing, less of it will happen, but it's a reality for households, and people need to be able to change jobs and keep their housing to whenever possible. So I don't have a strong opinion about minimum fund balance. I think risk tolerance is really interesting and important. And obviously, as we've kind of test driven this, my own personal risk tolerance and where I feel like taxpayer funds should be protected is really around having a fair amount of certainty in what you're buying. But I also have the developer hat of, I know those early dollars are the hardest to get. So I think land banking is a really powerful place to be the early dollars, because then, you know, you're cutting out that carry period interest in a really powerful way. And it's a more studied investment because you have the collateral of the land. So I love that one. That seems simple. I also think that the sort of short list of proven partners makes a ton of sense. I mean, again and again, we see people with big dreams and good intentions really have a hard time developing in mountain communities. And Chaff has actually taken an interesting approach to this one where if you've never gotten an allocation of 9% credits, you have to come in with someone who has. So there's a pathway to partner and become proven. And I think you know, for us, we even have a pathway of like, well, you can be in that general, like say one of the projects we recently awarded is really successful. Like next time around, they could be on that short list because they've been a successful recipient of our awards. So I think that's a good, and I'm not too worried about the playing favorites piece of this. It's such risky business and so complex that I think experience is a huge component of anyone's resume. Let's see. So then I think that I liked the divergence of like the committee supports the more complex applications and there's a glide path that's more administrative for the things that are more formulaic and also more time sensitive. So that's helpful actually to just have those two paths. And then yes to a standardized set of technical information. I do think that one of the things I think that has slowed our cadence is like we as an ad hoc committee generate a whole list of questions that probably could have been preempted if we were like, yeah, this is just the format, you know, like the questions are already answered or they're NA. And then final thing is, I do think I like the idea of an interview or a Q&A with the applicant when it's over a certain threshold. I think it's really nice for an applicant to have their sort of day in court, and it really helps give the committee a sense of who they are, and that organic back and forth starts to create some parameters of what are going to be workable deal terms. So I think there's a ton of value in that. I know it takes a little time to get it scheduled, but I would support that.
And Miss Stephanie said,
Great, thanks, Willa. And company. Todd, go ahead.
My assistant Remy is helping.
Oh, good job.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, appreciate the time. General feedback on draft goals, programs, and process. Brad, I think you and your team are doing great on that. I don't know if I have any feedback. Geographic scope, I think my only concern, I love the idea of households working in Steamboat. I think monitoring and managing that is nearly impossible. You know, it's no different than the deed restriction component. It's like at the point in time of application, somebody can qualify. What happens a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road? And the thing that we need to keep in mind is that when we're adding housing stock, whether it's direct or indirect, we're providing some relative relief to call it the whole ecosystem. I think that, you know, from my personal perspective, Routt County is kind of the minimum starting point. You know, is it a proximity 20 miles around Steamboat Springs? What makes sense? I don't know if I have a strong opinion about that one way or the other, but definitely the project needs to, at a minimum, be within Route County, if not closer to Steamboat. And I understand the argument, it is a steamboat tax. Really, these tax dollars are being paid by people who are coming and staying here, that are visiting here. And it's that component that is displacing or creating our housing situation. And that is affecting every community that is around us. So the ability to provide relief is important, and often those dollars can go further if we get outside of Steamboat Springs. So I think our ability to leverage success can be greater where we can make the dollars go further, if that is understandable. I think I provided plenty of opinions about the other stuff on risk tolerance. Land banking, I think that's an awesome idea. I totally echo Willa's comments on that. I think that's a great way to help manage equity within a project, and long-term ownership of that individual land component. So that's all I got.
Awesome, thanks, Todd. Acknowledging we're like right at end time, so folks can hang out for maybe 10 more minutes, but if you gotta go. Other thoughts?
Throw some mud before we leave.
Yeah, keep going, let's go. Yeah. Is this, are we all wrong? Like, and I don't mean all wrong, like, is this like dead on arrival from your perspective in terms of actually taking this to council in December as like the starting point for the guidance that we need to get from them? Again, as I mentioned, we had more that we could share that's deeper than what was shared today, but we want to get some political tailwinds there before we sort of really dive into like production of like the key components of the structure.
I think
It
it's
feels ready to me.
Cool, thank you.
I mean, this is just me speaking personally. I think what feels really important is the standardized nature of this. Hopefully it being extremely standardized, whatever that ends up looking like. When I heard people talking about the interviews, I can't decide where I stand on that. Like, I understand that it felt really nice to speak to the applicants, but also that introduces, at least some subjectivity into a process that should be relatively objective, right? The numbers and the project should speak for itself. And so I'm a little concerned about that. But at the same time, when we're basing so much of this on experience, I mean, even that could be broken down into data too. But I just want to make sure that this ends up being as standardized as possible and not feeling like a buddy, these are our preferred contractors. As much as I'd love to be a preferred contractor, I don't want it to seem like that's a really hard group to break into, and for anyone, whether they're brand new or not. And I am just personally very uncomfortable with that high risk. I'm uncomfortable with taxpayer dollars becoming non-refundable and not seeing a project come out of it. But that's like, I know that that's a very personal thing. I don't understand the like finance world, even a fraction of what some of you in this room do, and I'll recognize that. So it could just be that I don't understand it well enough, but yeah, just seeing that money go out the door and not get a project out of it is really a sad thought to me. And the geographic scope, I put myself through a mental exercise where I don't even know what you can develop in like Oak Creek or Clark, but if there's a multifamily complex in Oak Creek or something that we could consider that, and they come and ask for the exact same buy down as Base Camp just got, are we as on board for that? And I don't know if I would be. I think that the bedroom communities are naturally happening. I don't know whether that's seen as a good thing because people's real estate values are going up. I don't know if that's a negative thing in those communities. I have no idea. It sounded like you were saying that it's seen as a pretty negative thing, but I think to the point that we can keep this development as close to Steamboat as possible, I think would maybe be the route. That's my personal feeling. So maybe a point system for proximity. I'm not saying that those funds shouldn't be available for those outlying areas, but I don't know, I think that we talk so much about how hard it is to develop here, and maybe what's happening in those bedroom communities is more natural, and I don't know, maybe this money should be prioritized for here, but not off the table for
But
outside.
there could be a product type that's
Sure.
harder to develop here than there that we see as supporting the broader need in that community. I mean, I think where Chris was going makes sense in terms of like it probably should be prioritized
Mhm.
for, project locations within the city of Steamboat Springs or within the urban growth boundary, but that should not prohibit or foreclose on the possibility of relief, essentially offering some relief to the system by development in other places in Route County. And that's the general tenor of the conversation that I've heard.
Well, one thing that might fit into that is, I said to the DST and did all that, but it seemed like a lot of people were asking, why aren't we putting money towards, LTR to SDR conversions? Why aren't we working on density and ADUs? All these things. I mean, if you want to spend money in Steamboat, you can certainly focus, and this obviously incorporates that as four of the areas where you thought you could spend some of this other than maybe, ground up development. Maybe there's a chance to put some money in there. And that, I mean, to the extent that I'm aware of public sentiment, which is not a lot. I mean, it seems like a lot of people are asking those questions, like, can't we just do a little more with what we have? Maybe that would be inside and therefore easily done.
Those specific programs would fit inside. something,
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, is maybe that's if you're looking at all these different options, it seems like there's some demand for that. It's just people talking demand or actual demand. I never did tell. I'm sure somebody would like some ADUs, more density, whatever.
But like the ADU is a good example, like, sure, there probably is demand, there's even interest from the development community, by that I mean a property owner who can develop a single ADU.
Right.
But when the strings are revealed, and like if you receive these funds, you actually now have a deed restriction on that ADU, and we have to sort of structure what does a forgivable loan program look like, where if you back out of that day 180 of your deal, you have to pay us back entirely, and if this rides for 10 years and it's totally forgivable, I mean, we'd have to structure
Yeah.
very specific deal parameters around something like that.
I'm just happy those are in the conversation as part of one possible outline. I have 4 semi-adult children, so I kind of like the idea. I don't know. Vacations again won't like it.
Other thoughts from the group?
I like the structure of the solicitation process a lot. The idea of having standardized information, I won't echo it, but great. Thoughts on the interview, I think it's important. I think the applicant needs to have the ability to address questions and to maybe address like misunderstandings within the first reading of the application. So that's a really important step in the process. I think it should be treated more like with the same level of formality that, planning commission has, where there's much more defined boundaries between the applicant and the committee. I found our last interview a bit awkward because the boundaries were so porous and the conversation is going back and forth, and I didn't know if I could address them or not. So I'd like to avoid that going forward. I have comments, I guess, on the sort of early idea of the deed restriction program, but it doesn't look like you're looking for feedback on that yet.
Share it if you got it. I mean, yeah, if there's.
I'm a little concerned about the two-step, like the 2 levels of investment. I just early kind of thoughts, I think 15%. First of all, 15% of what is it the purchase price when the owner first bought it? But 15% for no appreciation cap seems like a really high sort of price for us, maybe not a large return on community investment. That was my only concern. I think it's particularly, I think it could play out in really strange ways with the STR overlay. Property value in a red zone is totally different from the green. Anyway, those are just some early thoughts.
In your minimum fund balance, it seems like we're headed toward parsing out, here's how much we have for this and this and this. And
Yeah, my main reason for asking that, Steve, is we are suggesting an open and rolling application process.
Right.
But I want a time where I said, I'm sorry, we're not open for business right now because
Yeah.
essentially the fund has to replenish.
Better luck next year.
Yeah, whenever it gets to whatever that magic number is, it's open again. But I just want that to be, something that's communicated.
Could that be less about what application type comes in the door versus what product they're proposing? Like that chart of, we need this many units in this capacity, this many units in another. Could it be more about, we're putting this much money towards these types of units versus like, what if you didn't foresee someone being able to produce this unit in a way that, this application was intended for?
We can, I mean, to me, it's basically a communications thing. I want to be as sort of transparent and standardized as possible. So to use that example, let's say we end up like that, we no longer are accepting LOIs if we are at $10 million or below. But if you have a project that sort of hits these certain sort of priority projects, like we are open to having a conversation. It doesn't mean you are advancing all the way through from LOI to full application, but we will take a consultation at that time or something. Like we could do something that just makes it very clear. It just may be a matter of days or months before essentially the fund is replenished, but being very clear that the conversation can happen on the front end. Even if we are essentially aren't accepting LOIs. Todd, I saw your hand come up.
Yeah, sorry, I talked too much. If I talk too much, just tell me to zip it. But hey, I just wanted to say the comments that Calais made in regards to standardizing this process, I think that is critical. I actually highly support that. I think that for a million different reasons that is a critical component of this whole process. In regards to minimum fund balance, I actually think that's a pretty important piece too, because you never know what's going to come around the corner, and having a little money in your pocket is what gives you the opportunity to take advantage of really powerful situations. You mentioned $10 million. Personally, I think that is way too high. I think that it should be some sort of a percentage of collections that have occurred over a period of time historically. And the reason that I think that is as the economy ebbs and flows, this balance is going, or the collection rate of this balance is going to change. 3 months, 6 months, 12 months of historical collections. I think 12 months is probably too much, but 3 months of the last 12 months of average collection rate is what the balance should be. It keeps $2.5 million in the pockets of the city. I think that that having a minimum fund balance is an important piece to have.
Yeah, and apologies. 10 million is just the number that came into my head. When we've talked about it internally and kicked it around, it is closer to what Todd has suggested. Some relatively like essentially less than you would expect the minimum award to be. Like if someone's walking in the door trying to get support for 10 to 15 units, we kind of know that that's going to be multiple millions of dollars. So as long as we just have the ability to make that clear that we're not quite at the place where we can award funds is really what we're looking to communicate.
And from my perspective, I just think having a percentage of a collection rate versus a flat dollar is important because our economy is going to ebb and flow.
That tax is adjustable time for you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
I totally agree on, first of all, I think just expectations for staff and applicants that to say, hey, we're not taking applications now while the fund replenishes, or we're expecting we will at a certain time. It's nice to have that predictability. And I also had the gut reaction of 10 being really high. And I think either a percentage or a pretty intuitive floor like 2 million makes sense. And I don't have a strong opinion, but I think the principle of it is clear.
And I think just my final thought on that is maybe this is a rocks, pebbles, sand kind of situation. The council is going to prioritize naturally volume at first because that's what we want to achieve. And then we're going to get down to a little bit more granular and then finally ADUs, et cetera. Which I'm calling sand, I guess.
For only $500. Right.
The one other thing on
I guess the other thing on fund balance would just be that if we are expecting this to sunset or roll into something else at some point, just having the ability to spend it fully down when that time is right.
That makes sense.
One other just thought on the fund balance is maintaining what would be, from the developer's perspective, a contingency amount. So the amount of dollars that we're giving out, we retain X percentage, because if we don't think that people are gonna start a project and then come back to us for more money, I think we're blind to that. You know, people are going to have cost overruns, those type of things. And if we're invested in the project, just like Clay's making a point, we don't want to just give money and have it evaporate and nothing be built. You know, if we need to provide a supplemental extra $1 million to get something over the hump, we want to make sure that we have that money in our piggy bank. And I think that lends legitimacy to the fund as well. And then my only other comments are, I think you guys did a great job on putting together a presentation to give the city council. And I think Gates' comment about people staying in their own lanes and
We're gonna try.
and trying to
Gates.
that happen, I think is critical, or else everything's just gonna stagnate.
Go ahead, Todd.
Hey, Bill, I just listen to your comment. I want to clarify. So you're talking about, contingency funds. So let's say, for instance, that we allocate $2 million to a project, a portion of money is set aside in case they have cost overruns. And as a partner in that project, we want to make sure that we've got adequate funding to facilitate them. And until that project is fully complete, does that contingency go away? Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, I was thinking about it more in kind of a broad stroke. So say we have $15 million out to, 5 or 6 different partners. We don't necessarily need to make a distinction that X amount of money is allocated to project A. But say there's $15 million out and we want to have a 10 or 15% contingency on the money that we're putting out the door. And that could be dependent on the buckets that we're talking about. You don't necessarily need contingency money for a deed restriction, but you might need it for a construction project. So I wasn't suggesting to get so granular as to individual projects, because that would suggest that we're going to backstop people if they run into trouble. I'm just saying from a management perspective of the entire fund, to just have something in the bank that can save us, can save them, generally speaking. And that would be, on there'd be no requirement to fund that contingency money. It would just be, to make things a little safer, I guess.
I
Gives you
don't
safety
know.
net. Yeah, I think
Well, I
it's-
don't know how I feel about this. The moment you do that for one project, like everyone's gonna expect it.
No, I
And
think-
why do we have
I
to be
think
the
it's when it goes
contingency?
completely upside down.
Yeah.
You have the option, you have enough money in the bank to save it if you choose to. It's not obligatory. I used to produce TV commercials and I always had a 10% sitting there for when someone did something crazy and it cost a bunch of money. It's like it was in the budget. So no, I'm not saying that everyone should feel like they get a bailout if they make bad decisions.
And to Bill's, it's not in a project budget. It's not a project contingency. It's
No,
a fund
it's like,
contingency.
oh God, they hit, I don't know, bad soil, something. I'm sorry, it's not personal. And it's gonna cost an extra 150 grand, like, maybe we can help. I don't know. I think that makes sense.
So shouldn't that be built into their,
It should.
into their
It should-
project
It
budget?
should be, and that should be, and that should be part of the detailed
Yeah.
deliverables and the standardized deliverables that people bring. I mean, we shouldn't entertain any project without a contingency. But if I recall, the ones that we just talked about, I mean, they barely had, I don't know if they had a contingency at all.
Well, it's almost
Like
like an
if we're gonna
informal
give them
buffer.
money and they get to 95% complete and they're, we're gonna hand this back to the bank. And we say, well, wait a second, we can save this project with the extra whatever.
With the user.
So that would be totally at our discretion. It wouldn't be,
It's hard to be objective if you've done that once, it's gonna be really hard to say no the next time. Sorry. I'm letting on my super conservative financial nature.
So, go ahead, Willow.
Sorry,
And-
I upon thinking about the fund balance a little bit more, I think we should be using the dollars as proactively as possible to stimulate housing. So I'm actually curious about looking more at like forward commit and I mean, I obviously we can't commit dollars that we don't full. Please let me talk. We can't commit more than we have, but I'm not sure I'm not sure that keeping a floor in the bank is actually serving our global mission of getting housing built as efficiently and creatively as we can. It's kind of a nice to have.
No, I hear you. The tension that we'll have is just from a council appropriation standpoint. And then even what would feel like a future appropriation, or a future spend, when they're making the appropriation, that the funds have to be available. So there'll be a little bit of governing from that perspective as well.
Fair enough. But I guess let's just play out what would be the downsides of we close solicitations when the fund balance is zero.
So it would be possible to make awards on a prospective basis for the current year's expected revenues. And you'd want to have like some safety factor in there, but you can't look to the next year just because of legal issues and committing the city to multi-year obligations.
Yeah.
I'm viewing this mostly as like just keeping the books straight on commitments as much as anything else, and not finding ourselves in a conversation that maybe is the sort of opposite of what was described earlier, of like actually having something what's feeling like lined up and then realizing, oh, we actually do not have the resources available that we thought we were, and we have to like pause something. And I'd rather make that communication as early as possible, that like we're not ready to make an investment today, but we will be ready for that investment in the future.
I just want to underline that there's a $25 million balance right now, and this is version 1 of this program, where we come into a context where there's lots of money to start spending, and then maybe 2 years from now, once it's mature and we're kind of spending it as fast as it comes in, hopefully, then we can take another look and recalibrate depending on what the experience has been.
Go ahead, Todd. This is where I say we're now really over. So I do want to wrap up so that everybody can get home. You've all hung in there somehow, but I do want you to go home.
So,
Go ahead,
so
Tom.
maybe it's less about minimum fund balance, but as you're talking about, it's a maximum of an appropriation of a future anticipated revenue stream.
Any other thoughts from the group?
No, great job. Thank you.
I think
Go ahead.
maybe we could follow up over email on
Yeah,
like a
please.
list of standardized information
Yes.
just to help you all.
That'd be amazing.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't
I mean,
need to go through that verbally, but
I-
it'd be helpful to maybe share that as a group.
That would be
what
great.
we're
I know you sent over some DOH stuff. I mean, yeah, that'd be great. I mean, I am working from the presumption that we will hear from council in early December. Like, yes, like everything should generally look and feel the same, depending on what audience it's going to. But I don't know that. Like maybe it was Bill who was saying we have generally approached this from making it simple from a let's get together and make a deal perspective versus like let's structure this out and really kind of get the detail out as early as possible. That is where we are trending, but that is trending in some ways away from where we've been. So I hope there's receptivity from council in December to go more towards like, no, this is the reality of the data that we're going to collect. And if the data is not available, then this may not make it much further in the application process, because we simply cannot evaluate. There are 3 levels that have to evaluate this deal, And if one of the levels cannot appropriately and fairly evaluate the proposal, then it's dead at that point in time. It can come back when that standardized data is available, but like there is a natural place where essentially a proposal stops because we don't have the information needed to evaluate.
Do you guys have a list of like data that you've been collecting, like
Or that you had to-
data that you've been collecting that you want to collect?
So the RFP laid out some expectations of what I would call submittal requirements. You know, Emily has shared with me previously, like the Division of Housing, Jaffa came up earlier, like they're constantly sort of evaluating projects that have similar expectations in terms of frankly scrutiny around public dollars. To make sure that we understand the community benefit of the project as well as sort of the financial underpinnings of the deal from both a benefit and a risk perspective. So there's a little bit out there, but like I think what we're suggesting is it's going to be a little bit like you have to pass through, you have to hit these, or there is no way that the conversation continues until you have that information to share. Because to be 100% transparent, we've had conversations recently with folks who have suggested that they are unwilling to share even a basic pro forma, and we've tried to communicate, there's no pathway for you to receive funds without opening up your books a little bit. I understand that there might be reasons why you don't want to do that, but like these are public dollars. I think Emily says it well, public scrutiny on public dollars, that's what we have to do. So there may not be a ton of comfort from every potential applicant that this stuff makes its way into an agenda packet like you all have or into a council packet, but like that is our base commitment on the transparency side of things.
Yeah, but an expectation on the level of detail in whatever financial documents the city's requesting would really help people, particularly in the public sector, understand.
Yeah.
If this is, something that they want to get into.
Yeah. So I'm gonna thank you. I'm gonna do one procedural thing and just say, if there's anyone here for public comment, now is your opportunity to provide public comment.
Public.
With that, I will close public comment and adjourn today's meeting. Appreciate you all helping out and having conversations. At this point, feel free to either email me directly, email Gates, email the group if there's something that you kind of want to share, or we can compile and share out. I suspect Gates and I have a primary sort of obligation to get through the work session on the 9th and report out to this group. Again, I'm convinced we'll hear enough that like there's probably one more round of conversation that we want to have with you all that drills down even deeper. After that, I suspect I may say thank you for your time and service. If you want to re-up for the next version of this, like I will let you know what that opportunity looks like. So
Does this group already come with a free house and pass? Or do we have to wait until it's?
no, you have to wait. You have to wait.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for everybody online. Appreciate it. I'm gonna close the meeting.
Is there a level of detail that would like put YVHA off from applying for the money?
No, and if I said public sector, I meant private sector.